Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the country you called home no longer existed in the same way. The streets are crowded, trains are packed with frightened families, people are carrying children, small bags, and whatever possessions they can save. Some are traveling toward a new country. Others are leaving the homes their families had lived in for generations. This was the reality of 1947. British India was divided into two independent countries, India and Pakistan. But why did Britain leave? Why did the British Empire, which had ruled the Indian subcontinent for nearly 2 centuries, suddenly give up its control? And why did independence come with one of the largest and most tragic migrations in modern history? This is the story of the partition of India and the decline of British power in South Asia. To understand 1947, we have to go back more than a century. British influence in India expanded through the activities of the East India Company. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, British influence in Bengal grew rapidly. Over the following decades, the company expanded its territories, influence, and military power. But the turning point came in 1857. A major uprising against British rule spread across large parts of northern and central India. The rebellion was eventually defeated, but Britain decided that India could no longer be governed through a private trading company. In 1858, control of India was transferred directly to the British Crown. The British Raj had begun. For decades, Britain built railways, ports, administrative institutions, and a powerful military system across the subcontinent. India became extremely important to the British Empire. It supplied raw materials, it was a major market, and Indian soldiers served throughout the British Empire. For decades, Britain built railways, ports, administrative institutions, and a powerful military system across the subcontinent. India became extremely important to the British Empire. It supplied raw materials, it was a major market, and Indian soldiers served throughout the British Empire. But British rule also created deep political, economic, and social tensions. And gradually, a new force began to emerge: Indian nationalism. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, more Indians were demanding political rights and eventually self-government. The Indian National Congress became one of the most important political organizations in the independence movement. Then came one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi promoted mass political action, including non-cooperation and civil disobedience. His message was simple: British rule should end. Millions of ordinary people became involved in the independence movement. But the demand for independence was not the only political question. Another major organization was becoming increasingly influential: the All India Muslim League. Under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Muslim League increasingly argued that Muslims needed strong political safeguards. By the 1940s, the demand for a separate Muslim homeland had become central to the political crisis. The idea of Pakistan was gaining enormous support among many Muslims. Now Britain faced a problem. How could it leave India without creating chaos between competing political visions? Then came World War II. In 1939, Britain entered the war against Nazi Germany. India was automatically brought into the war because it was part of the British Empire. Indian soldiers fought in campaigns across Europe, Africa, and Asia. But the war placed an enormous financial and military burden on Britain. Britain emerged victorious in 1945. But victory had come at a huge cost. The British economy was severely weakened. The country had enormous debts. Rebuilding Britain itself was now a massive challenge. And maintaining a vast overseas empire was becoming increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, political pressure inside India was growing. The Quit India movement had already demonstrated the strength of anti-colonial resistance. And after the war, the British government faced an increasingly difficult question. Could Britain realistically continue ruling India? The answer was becoming clear. Britain needed a way out. There was no single reason Britain left India. Several forces came together. First, Britain's economic position had dramatically weakened after World War II. Second, Indian nationalism had become too powerful to ignore. Third, maintaining political control required enormous military and administrative resources. And fourth, Britain faced growing communal and political tensions within India. There was another important development. In 1946, the Royal Indian Navy experienced a major mutiny. The unrest spread to several cities and received support from sections of the population. Although the rebellion was suppressed, events like this demonstrated the growing difficulty of maintaining unquestioned British authority. Britain still possessed military power, but empire was no longer as sustainable as it had once been. The British government concluded that power in India would have to be transferred. But there was a huge disagreement. Should India remain united, or should it be divided? Political negotiations became increasingly difficult. The Congress leadership generally supported a united India, although disagreements existed over how power should be distributed. The Muslim League increasingly demanded Pakistan. Communal tensions intensified. In 1946, violence in Calcutta and other areas caused thousands of deaths. The situation deteriorated further in parts of Bengal, Bihar, Punjab, and elsewhere. British leaders feared that a prolonged political deadlock could lead to even greater violence. Then came Lord Louis Mountbatten. He became the last viceroy of British India in 1947. Mountbatten was given the task of transferring power. Originally, British plans allowed more time, but the timetable was accelerated. The final decision was made. British India would be divided. Two new dominions would emerge, India and Pakistan. Pakistan became independent on August 14, 1947. India became independent on August 15th. But independence came with an enormous human cost. One of the most dramatic parts of partition was the drawing of the new border. A British lawyer, Cyril Radcliffe, was given the responsibility of drawing boundaries between the new states. He had never previously worked in India. He had only a short amount of time to complete the task. The final boundary divided the provinces of Punjab and Bengal. But the line on the map was not just a political border. It cut through villages, districts, communities, roads, railways, and family networks that had existed for generations. Millions of people suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of the new border. Hindus and Sikhs moved toward India. Many Muslims moved toward Pakistan. The migration became one of the largest forced or pressured population movements of the 20th century. Trains carried enormous numbers of refugees. Some trains arrived safely. Others became scenes of horrific violence. Families were separated. Homes were abandoned. And communities that had lived alongside one another for generations were torn apart. Historians continue to debate the exact death toll, but hundreds of thousands of people are believed to have died during the violence and upheaval. So, did Britain simply lose India? Not exactly. Britain was not militarily defeated in a conventional war in 1947. Instead, British imperial power became increasingly difficult to maintain. World War II weakened Britain's finances. Indian nationalism had become a mass political force. The legitimacy of colonial rule had been severely damaged. Political negotiations had reached an impasse. Communal violence threatened to become even worse. And Britain faced a changing international environment. Across Asia and Africa, colonial rule was increasingly being challenged. The age of empire was beginning to change. Britain could still possess military power, but power is not only about armies. An empire also requires money, political legitimacy, cooperation, and the ability to govern. By 1947, maintaining British rule in India was becoming increasingly unsustainable. Partition created two new countries, but the story did not end there. India and Pakistan inherited enormous challenges. Millions of refugees needed homes. Governments had to be built. Assets and institutions had to be divided. And the two new countries quickly entered into conflict over territory, especially Kashmir. The consequences of partition continue to shape South Asia today. But perhaps the most important lesson of 1947 is this: history is rarely caused by one person, or one decision, or one event. The end of British rule came from decades of political struggle, nationalism, economic change, war, communal tensions, and changing global power. Britain did not simply walk away because it suddenly became weak. The world around the British Empire had changed, and India had changed with it. In August 1947, an empire that had ruled the subcontinent for generations came to an end. Two new countries were born, but millions paid an enormous price for the transition. The map had changed. The empire was gone, but the consequences of 1947 would last for generations. This is Skywatch World. If you want more cinematic stories explaining the events that changed our world, subscribe. Because history is not just about what happened, it is about understanding why.